The ISO controls the sensitivity of your sensor to light. So ISO was made a standard in the 1970s, and that standard was to let a photographer know how sensitive that film was to light. So a ISO rating of 100 was a film that had low sensitivity, and an ISO of 800 was a film that had a lot of sensitivity to light. But these days, we don't shoot a lot on film. There are people that are still shooting film, but people that are shooting on DSLR cameras and mirrorless cameras, they're not shooting on film. The light that they let into the camera is coming into a sensor. The sensor is what interprets the image. The ISO rating has been translated over into DSLR and mirrorless cameras in order to control the sensitivity of the sensor. I say that again. The ISO controls the sensitivity of your sensor to light. If you have a low ISO number, that means that your sensor is not very sensitive to light. If you have a high ISO number, then your sensor is very sensitive to light. Let me give you some examples. So right now I am shooting at ISO 400. This is roughly the native ISO for the camera that I'm shooting on. If I turn the ISO down like this, that means that my sensor is not very sensitive to light. Even though I've got this blazing softbox up here and I've got another light over here, the sensor is not registering much light. But if we take the ISO up, so right now it's at 100. I'm shooting the rest of these videos at 400, but let me take this thing up a bit. So I put it up to 800, and this definitely brightens up the scene. You can see that my light that's hitting me right here is kind of washing out just a little bit more. It's not truly overexposed, but it is pretty bright. This light over here, you can see that it's exposing this side of my face more, but here's where you can really tell. Look at my background. You can see more of it now. Let's go up a couple of notches and see what happens. So I set the ISO on this one to, what do I got it at? 2000. So I cranked it all the way up to ISO 2000. You can see that the sensor is more sensitive to light. It basically registers more of that light. So now this light has me all nice and blown out, and then this thing is blazing right here on the side of my face. I mean, look, if I turn my hand like this, you can see that my ring is really bright. The back side of my hand is really bright. You can see that this other hand that's going into the frame, that's really bright. You can also see more of my background, okay? So the ISO in this situation is too high. It is too bright. Having a high ISO comes with another issue. So right now I'm throwing an effect on the screen. Now this is post-production just to kind of illustrate it, and I really cranked this up a little bit more than it should be, but I really want to illustrate this point. A high ISO will give your image noise. That's right, you're seeing it right here, this noise that's on the screen right now. This is a byproduct of a high ISO. It's too much noise. It's too grainy. So I'm gonna take my ISO back down to 400. This is back to normal. This is where I have been shooting this whole time. So this ISO is comfortable. There's no noise in the scene. My lights work properly. I'm not blown out. I'm not overexposed. Adjusting your ISO will change how sensitive your sensor is to the light that comes into the camera. So let's run that path again. The light will come in through the lens. It will pass through the aperture, which is controlled by the f-stop. It will go to the shutter, which is controlled by the shutter speed. The shutter will move out of the way and then expose the sensor to the light that came in through the camera. The sensor will look at the light and go, I'm gonna see this much light, or I'm only gonna see this much light. You're adjusting the sensitivity of the sensor to the light that comes in through the camera with adjusting the ISO. A lower ISO number, less light. A higher ISO number, more light. A lower ISO number means a darker image. A higher ISO number means a brighter image. But remember, adjusting your ISO up comes with a catch. The higher you take your ISO, the more noise you introduce into your image. So there's a rule of thumb here that a lot of photographers like to follow. Basically, it means set your ISO as low as you can and leave it there as much as you can. There is a caveat to this. You will have to adjust your ISO. As you take your f-stop number up and as you take your shutter speed up, that means you're going to need the sensor to be more sensitive to light. So you will have to adjust your ISO. The more wide open your aperture, or the lower your f-stop number, and the slower your shutter moves, the lower you're going to have to take your ISO, because then you'll be letting a lot of light in, and if the sensor is really sensitive to light, then you're going to blow out your image. Low ISO, darker image. High ISO, brighter image. Low ISO, less noise. High ISO, more noise.